"You have no right to be here. This is private HOA property." That's what she said to my brother Elijah, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. As if the man who designed half this land was some random trespasser off the street. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. My name's Noah McCain. I'm an architect, a son of this soil, and the brother of the man they just tried to erase. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for something that mattered, because what happened next, it's a war story, just not the kind you'd expect. We grew up here, the gravel under our boots, the sound of that old wind chime Dad hung by the oak tree. Those things aren't background noise. They're stitched into our bones. Elijah left to serve overseas, and I stayed behind to help Dad draft the development blueprints. We were going to retire here, build around the creek, preserve the trees, keep the bench he made from scrap cedar the summer Mom died. That bench still sits by the old irrigation line, worn, quiet, and holding every memory we ever buried in this place. Dad passed away last fall, lung cancer, quick and cruel. Elijah came back a month later, honorably discharged and tired in a way only soldiers understand. The last thing he expected was to come home and get called a criminal. It started with a warning notice stapled to our own fence. Violation, unauthorized presence on association grounds. I found it flapping in the wind like a scarlet letter. Black marker scribbled across the top. Trespasser report filed. No contact, no knock, just that. I called Elijah immediately. He drove out in less than 20 minutes, gravel spitting from his tires as he pulled up. He stepped out in boots and a flannel shirt, jaw clenched, eyes scanning every house like he was back on patrol. "This supposed to be a joke," he said, tearing the notice off the fence. "I signed off on this development 4 years ago. I paved that sidewalk." "You paved it," I said, "but apparently you don't have clearance to walk on it." That's when she appeared. Clipboard in one hand, sunglasses pushed to the top of her frosted blonde bob, power walking across our gravel shoulder like she owned the entire zip code. Tiffany Norwood, HOA president. The kind of woman who uses bylaws the way some people use brass knuckles. She didn't look at me, didn't ask for a conversation, just turned to Elijah and said, "Sir, you are not registered as an active resident under our HOA guidelines. This property is under association jurisdiction. Your presence is unauthorized." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm the developer." "That's not relevant at this stage," she said. "Our records don't show your name on the current residential list." Elijah folded the notice, tucked it in his pocket. Calm, controlled. "Maybe your records are outdated. I built this place before your committee had a name." She stared at him like he was wallpaper. "Then I suggest you contact the proper legal channels. Until then, you are in violation." And with that, she turned and walked off like she'd just finished a performance. For a moment, Elijah didn't move. He just looked down the gravel path back toward the bench under the oak. His boots dug into the same dirt we used to roll toy trucks through. His jaw flexed. "Dad would have flipped that clipboard into the crick." I laughed, even though I felt sick. Because it wasn't just about the property. It was about our legacy. About trying to erase the people who built the foundation, literally and figuratively, just because some HOA president thinks paperwork outranks memory. The irony? Elijah was still finalizing the last inspection report for a parcel he helped fund. The paperwork delay was due to Dad's estate settlement, not negligence. But Tiffany didn't care. The rules were her sword, and my brother had become her next target. That old bench by the creek, Dad built it the summer before the county approved our first zoning plan. He carved our initials into it. NM plus EM equals home. It's been there ever since, weather-worn but strong. Elijah and I stood in silence, watching Tiffany disappear behind her column of hedges. "Looks like we're not welcome on our own land," he said. I looked at the bench. Then maybe it's time we remind them who laid the foundation. This wasn't going to be one of those quiet battles. We didn't ask for it, but we weren't going to be written out of the story. Not while that bench still stood. Elijah didn't say another word as we walked back toward the house. The gravel crunched beneath our boots, steady and sharp, like the only sound still respecting the land. He paused at the bench under the oak tree, his hand brushing the worn cedar slats like he was checking the pulse of a family member. "She thinks this place belongs to her," he muttered. "No," I said, unlocking the front door. She thinks the rules belong to her, which is worse. The inside of the house still smelled like cedar and rain, the same mix Dad always said reminded him of building days. We hadn't changed much since he passed, same crooked picture frame in the hallway, same squeaky floorboard by the dining table that you could never sneak past as a kid. I set the notice down on the counter. Elijah scanned it again, jaw tightening with each line. "They're citing Section 14B of the HOA Charter," he said. "That section didn't even exist when this project broke ground." "That's the trick," I said. "They rewrote the bylaws after most of the initial developers left, and since we didn't immediately occupy the home after Dad's death, they're using that as a loophole." He nodded slowly. "So they're trying to phase us out, on paper first. And in public next," I added, pulling out the latest HOA newsletter from a drawer. The headline read, "Unauthorized access. Residents urged to report suspicious activity. No names, but a picture of our fence. Cropped, tilted, framed to make it look like a barricade." Elijah scanned it, then laughed under his breath. "They're staging a smear campaign. I built the damn drainage system under this road." "They're not interested in facts," I said. "They're interested in control." It was subtle at first. Residents started walking their dogs farther from our yard. A delivery truck that usually dropped off packages at our porch now left boxes at the edge of the road, small things, but it all felt orchestrated. The next day, a bright yellow sign appeared near the main road. "Association oversight area begins here. Trespassers will be prosecuted." It wasn't subtle anymore. That's when Elijah snapped a picture. "You know what this is?" he asked, holding up his phone. "It's a performance. Everything they're doing, every sign, every notice, it's about staging a narrative. And we're the villains in their version of the story." He nodded. Time to flip the script. We spent the rest of the day reviewing property records, development contracts, zoning permissions, anything with Elijah's name on it. Most of the documents were at Dad's old office in town, but we kept digital copies. Somewhere. "I'll check the cloud backup," I said, already pulling out my laptop. Elijah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They're banking on one thing. We don't have the fight in us." "Maybe they'll think we'll pack up quietly," I said. "We won't," he replied, low and steady. Later that afternoon, I noticed a familiar silver SUV idling near our driveway. Sylvia Tran. HOA secretary. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Windows cracked, phone aimed at our house like she was scouting for violations. I stepped outside, waving politely. She flinched, then pulled away, tires squealing slightly. When I walked back inside, Elijah just looked up. "They're getting nervous." "I should be," I said. "We're not leaving, not again." Elijah glanced toward the back window, where the bench under the oak was half drenched in shadow. "You remember what Dad said when they tried to fine him for keeping the tree?" I nodded. He said, "You don't prune the roots of a tree that remembers your name." Elijah smirked. "Exactly." That evening, we printed out the original development approval forms and started cross-referencing timestamps, contractor signatures, even geotagged construction photos. And that's when something strange stood out. "Hey," I said, pointing at one of the signatures, "this document's from 3 years ago, but the HOA president's name on it isn't Tiffany." Elijah leaned over, squinting. "That's Denise Warner. She was the original signatory, so Tiffany came in after the fact." "Which means," I said slowly, "there's a gap between when we finished Phase 2 and when Tiffany took over. A lot can get revised in that kind of window." We exchanged a glance. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. "Let's not just prove we belong," Elijah said. "Let's show them who really built this place." Because this wasn't just about staying. It was about setting the record straight before they rewrote us out of it entirely. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening, just after sunset, in the community center they'd built with leftover funds from the Phase 2 development. Another project Elijah had designed, though they'd never once credited him for it. We weren't on the guest list, not officially, but we walked in anyway. Tiffany was already seated at the head of the long table, sleeves pressed, posture stiff, like she was hosting a Senate hearing. Beside her was Sylvia Tran, tapping furiously on a tablet. At the far end, scribbling something with a shaky hand, sat a man in a beige sweater vest and wire-rimmed glasses. Derek Vaughn, HOA treasurer. Derek used to be our neighbor growing up. Soft-spoken, always had a calculator in his back pocket. Dad used to tease him for balancing the budget before recess. He'd been on the HOA board for years, mostly quiet, never confrontational. But when we walked in, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Elijah McCain," Tiffany said without looking up. "You're not on the schedule." "No," Elijah replied evenly, "but I figured the man you accused of trespassing should get to hear the charges in person." Tiffany pursed her lips. "This is a private session for board members only." I stepped forward. "That didn't stop you from stapling public notices to our property." Sylvia glared at me, but Tiffany simply adjusted her posture and folded her hands. "We're enforcing policy. If you take issue with that, submit a written appeal through the formal process." Derek cleared his throat. "Actually, the notices weren't reviewed by the full board before being distributed." Tiffany's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" "I mean," Derek stammered, tapping his pen, "I didn't see them in the approval docket. Usually, I sign off on anything that escalates to community-wide enforcement." His fingers twitched against his notepad, ink smudging where he'd pressed too hard. Tiffany smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, sometimes we expedite for safety." Derek nodded, too quickly. "Right, yes, of course, safety," but his hand kept shaking. Elijah caught it too. "Funny thing, Derek," he said gently. "You remember when we dug the drainage swales behind Phase 3? You helped Dad mark the runoff points." Derek gave a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, I remember. Long time ago." "That was the year Tiffany moved in," I added, "before she rewrote the entire code book." Tiffany stood. "This is not a productive conversation. If you have documentation to present, submit it through legal channels." Elijah took a slow breath. "You're denying the man who developed this land a seat at the table." "I'm following policy," she snapped, "and frankly, your tone is inappropriate." The irony almost made me laugh. She could call my brother a trespasser, block access to our land, issue warnings to neighbors, but we were the ones crossing lines? Derek's pen rolled off the table. He bent to pick it up, but his movements were slow, hesitant. When he came back up, his eyes met mine briefly, just a flicker, and then dropped again. He knew. As the meeting broke up, Tiffany whispered something sharp to Sylvia, who immediately began typing. Derek shuffled his papers into a leather folder with unsteady hands. "Derek," I said, as we passed by him, "you doing okay?" He nodded without looking. "Yeah, just tired. Long meeting." "Elijah's not going anywhere, you know," I said, my voice low. "No matter what they scribble in your notes." He stopped fidgeting for a beat. "I never voted on that notice." "I know," I replied. His grip tightened on the folder. "You didn't get it from me, but look closely at who did sign it." Then he walked out, fast, shoulders hunched like the cold had settled in his spine. Back at home, we scanned the notice again, 3 signatures, Tiffany's, Sylvia's, and one more. Illegible, almost like a scribble. But Derek's signature was nowhere to be found. "He's scared," I said, "but he's not with them." Elijah nodded. "Doesn't need to be. He left a breadcrumb." Outside, the wind rattled the leaves near the old bench. Elijah glanced that way, then turned back toward me. "We're not dealing with a board anymore," he said. "We're dealing with a cover-up." And for the first time since this all started, I saw a different fire in his eyes. Not just frustration, but focus. This wasn't just about defending our land anymore. It was about unraveling theirs. The padlock wasn't even subtle. We found it the next morning, bolted to the iron gate at the end of our gravel road, a bright orange chain wrapped tight like it had something to prove. A laminated sign dangled beside it. "Palm racked access closed. OA authorization required." Elijah stared at it, arms crossed, then kicked a rock down the ditch. They didn't even try to fake subtlety this time. It wasn't just a lock. It was a message. They wanted everyone to see it, a bold move designed to humiliate. The message was clear. This land, despite everything we built, was no longer ours. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. That's public access road up to the easement line. They can't legally block it. They don't care, he said flatly, because they know most people won't question a padlock if it's labeled authorized. Fear does the work for them. We walked the long way around, through the back trail near Clara Morales' property. Clara had lived there since before the HOA even existed. She was out in her garden when we passed. I saw him early this morning, she said, not even looking up from her tomato vines. 3 of them in that smug SUV. Sylvia, Tiffany, and some kid with a clipboard. They put that lock on like they were roping off a crime scene. Did they say anything? I asked. She looked up then, wiping dirt from her gloves. No, just that you were under administrative review, whatever that means. Elijah gave a half laugh. It means they're stalling while they fabricate something. Clara stared at us. Your daddy built half the walkways on this side of town. These people couldn't pour concrete without you boys telling them how to do it. And now they act like you're squatters? She pulled a folded newsletter from her apron pocket and handed it to me. It was the latest HOA bulletin. This one had a bolded headline. Security measures enforced following vandalism concerned. And underneath it, without a shred of proof or context, was a blurry, zoomed-in image of Elijah's truck, parked near the irrigation control shed. It looked menacing, the way they'd filtered it in grayscale. They're building a case, I muttered, a narrative. Look at this, Elijah said, pointing to the text. They're suggesting the development records were tampered with during past administration transitions. That's code for we're rewriting history. It was brilliant, in a sick way. They were spreading just enough doubt to muddy Elijah's claim without having to outright lie. People wouldn't argue if they didn't understand the paperwork. Later that afternoon, we tried calling the county records office. No answer. Then again, voicemail. The 3rd time we were told to leave a callback number due to limited staffing. You see it now, Elijah said, pacing near the bench under the oak. They're not just twisting the rules, they're walling off access to the truth. Physically, digitally, socially. They want you isolated, I said, cut off from the legacy that proves your right to be here. Exactly, he nodded. That's why the lock matters, not because it keeps us out, but because it tells everyone else we don't belong. That night, a new flyer appeared on community doors. Emergency HOA meeting to discuss rezoning and external threats to property values. There was no mention of us by name, of course, but everyone knew. Clara called us just after sundown. I overheard Sylvia talking outside the bakery this morning, she said. By the time we're done, he won't have a leg to stand on. No records, no right of entry, no precedent. Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter, silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said, They think they've boxed us in. Then we forget, I said. You designed this place. You know every corner they've paved over. He smiled, not a warm smile, but the kind that signals a quiet, careful plan beginning to form. I went to the back room, dug out the development binders from Dad's cabinet, and brought them into the living room. Elijah opened the first page, running his fingers over the blueprints like he was reading a map of buried treasure. They can rewrite the signs, he said, but they can't rewrite the foundation. And with that, the war moved underground. The next morning brought clouds heavy enough to stain the sky, not quite raining, just hanging there, thick and low, like they were waiting for something to snap. We spent the first half of the day digging through development files and surveying maps from the living room, but we kept circling the same problem. We had enough memory to fill books, but not enough documentation to silence people who'd never touched a shovel. We need originals, Elijah said, flipping through a stack of copies, stamped, signed, dated, the ones Dad stored after the first phase passed inspection. I paused. You thinking the old workshop? He looked up. Yeah, you remember the crawl space in the back? My stomach dropped a little. The workshop hadn't been touched since Dad passed. The place was more than just dusty. It felt sealed. We walked across the overgrown side yard and pried open the warped double doors. The scent hit first. Dry lumber, motor oil, rusted iron, and something deeper. Aged time. The single fluorescent bulb buzzed dimly overhead, flickering in slow, stubborn intervals. We stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the cold light, swirling like the air itself didn't know how to settle anymore. Floor still creaks the same, Elijah muttered, stepping over a half-buried vice clamp on the ground. The crawl space door was tucked behind an old water heater, just a plywood panel with 2 rusted hinges. Elijah knelt down and tugged, but it didn't give. Probably swollen shut, he said, digging his fingers into the edges. I handed him the old pry bar from the shelf. The wood groaned like it hadn't been touched in a decade, and maybe it hadn't. With one sharp pop, the panel gave way, and the smell of cedar and mildew spilled out like buried memory. We pointed our flashlights down into the space, cold, tight, silent. Elijah crawled in first, flashlight beam jerking across the wooden planks and cardboard boxes. I followed, slower. We passed shelves of old tools and mason jars full of screws. And then, tucked under a plastic tarp, was a black metal filing cabinet. He pulled the tarp aside. This has to be it. It took both of us to drag it into the light. The bottom drawer groaned as we forced it open. Inside, stacked and organized like someone knew one day we'd come looking, were the original stamped blueprints, dated, signed, and certified by the county, along with zoning permits, bank letters, and handwritten notes from Dad himself. "Elijah," I said, lifting a thick envelope, "look at this." It was a folded letter, sealed with electrical tape, scrawled in Dad's familiar handwriting. "If they ever try to erase what we built, this is your proof." Elijah didn't speak. He just took the envelope and held it, the skin around his knuckles tight. I reached into the back of the drawer and found a faded photo. Dad, Elijah, and me standing at the edge of the creek during the first land survey. The same bench in the background, barely built, just planks, but it was there. And suddenly I understood. That bench wasn't just a memory, it was a timeline marker, a living piece of history that tied all of this together. "We've got what we need," I said. Elijah nodded. "Now we start turning the screws." We hauled everything back to the house, wiped the dust off the documents, and laid them out on the dining table like war maps. Elijah worked in silence, scanning everything, making a list of what we'd use, what we'd copy, and what we'd keep for a final blow. As the storm outside finally broke into a quiet drizzle, I looked out the window toward the oak tree, where the bench still stood, darkened from the rain, but solid. "They buried the truth," Elijah said, eyes still on the files. "But Dad made sure it had roots." The flickering light overhead gave one last sputter before finally going dark. The rain hadn't let up by morning, but neither had we. While most of the neighborhood was hiding under umbrellas and HOA talking points, we were drying out blueprints and scanning every stamped page onto a flash drive. We had evidence. Now we needed leverage. Elijah was silent through most of the morning. Focused, tight-jawed, the kind of quiet that meant he was 2 steps ahead of the storm. He'd always been like that before a big project. Or deployment. "You ever notice something strange about those signatures?" he asked, tapping the corner of one zoning approval. I leaned in. 3 signatures approved Phase 2 of the development, but the third was off. Looped strangely, like someone was mimicking someone else's handwriting. "I think they forged it," he said. "This doesn't match any of the old records we have from Denise Warner's term." "Tiffany's trying to backdate authority," I muttered. "That, or erase everyone who came before her." That afternoon we drove out to the city clerk's annex, hoping for a copy of the original HOA registration logs. The clerk gave us that glazed-over look of someone who'd been warned not to get involved. "Those files are locked pending internal review," she said, sliding a laminated card across the desk like it was a shield. Elijah picked it up, then laid down a faded copy of the land approval stamped by the previous board. He said nothing, but the clerk stared at it longer than she had to. Her eyes flicked to the lower right corner where our dad's name was listed under Project Lead. She swallowed, then pushed the laminated card back to her side of the desk. "Try Derek Vaughn," she murmured, barely audible. "He keeps backups." We were already moving before she finished the sentence. By the time we knocked on Derek's door, the rain was down to a drizzle, but his eyes still looked stormed over. He didn't say anything at first, just looked past us like he hoped we'd walk away. "We're not here to threaten you," Elijah said. "We just need the truth." Derek hesitated, his hand still on the doorknob. "You know something's wrong," I added. "You tried to warn us at the meeting." He let out a sharp breath through his nose. "I didn't sign the lockout notice." "We know," I said, "and whoever did forged a name. We need your ledger, Derek, the original sign-off sheets, the ones you keep for redundancy." His fingers twitched again, same motion we saw in the meeting room. "You don't know what they've threatened," he whispered. "Tiffany, she doesn't just file paperwork, she files complaints, personal ones." Elijah's voice dropped. And if she gets away with this, she'll use that pen like a knife on the next person who crosses her. Derek didn't argue. He disappeared inside for 2 minutes. When he came back, he handed Elijah a folder. Thin, worn, no label. "I can't talk about it," he muttered. But this never left the finance room. Inside were the unaltered copies. The names didn't match what Tiffany submitted to the county. We had her. And then I saw something else. Buried near the back. A payment record. $10,000 transferred from the HOA emergency fund to a company called Silver Pine Consulting. No invoice, no line item, no description. "Silver Pine?" I asked aloud. Derek paled. That's her husband's shell company, supposed to be for landscaping services. 10 grand, Elijah said flatly, for bushes. Derek closed the door without another word. We walked back in the rain, neither of us saying much, but as the house came into view, Elijah paused. The bench. It was soaked, but solid. The cedar slats darkened to a deep amber, the initials still carved into the wood. NM plus EM equals home. He ran a hand along the top rail. They're laundering HOA funds through fake landscaping projects, forging approvals, locking people out of land they didn't build, and nobody's checked them. Until now, I said. Inside, we laid the forged and original documents side by side and started building our strategy. Elijah drafted a timeline. I cataloged discrepancies. Every forged line, every altered date, every unexplained transaction. The storm was finally breaking outside, but inside we were just getting started. We didn't sleep much that night. The documents Derek gave us were enough to light the fire, but we needed a clean strike. Something that couldn't be dismissed as an oversight or a misunderstanding. We were up until 3 a.m. cataloging every irregular payment, every forged signature, and every zoning stamp Tiffany had quietly buried. By morning, Elijah had a plan. "We're not going to fight them with noise," he said, pouring coffee. "We're going to use silence, cold, calculated, undeniable truth." "What's the move?" I asked, watching rain beat against the window. "We record her," he said. "Not arguing, not yelling. We bait her into saying what she's done in her own words." I paused. "She's too careful." "She's also proud," he said. "People like Tiffany never think they'll get caught, and when they feel cornered, they talk." We decided to use the HOA's own next meeting against them. An emergency board session was already announced via the latest flyer, conveniently titled, "Board Response to Allegations of Misinformation." I read it twice and laughed. "They know we're coming." "That's the point," Elijah said. "They'll try to spin it, but we'll let them talk themselves into a trap." Before the meeting, we visited Derek one last time. He didn't answer the door, but after a few knocks, we heard movement inside. The door creaked open, just enough for his eyes to peek through the chain. "I shouldn't talk to you," he said quietly. "Tiffany's been sniffing around, asked if I'd been misplacing files." Elijah leaned in. "We're not asking you to testify, not yet. Just help us understand what Silver Pine was really doing." Derek's eyes flicked downward. He hesitated, then pulled something from his sweater pocket, a folded envelope, thick and worn. "I kept a backup," he whispered. "My conscience wouldn't let me shred it." Inside were 2 invoices. One showed $10,000 paid for landscaping consultation. The other, dated 2 weeks later, was for community beautification, same amount, same contractor. But the signatures on the invoices, both signed by Tiffany, and the second one? Forged from the same template used to sign Elijah's removal from the developer registry. "She's not even switching handwriting styles," I muttered. "She's copying and pasting signatures." "I used to think she was just meticulous," Derek said. "Now I know she's dangerous." Elijah stepped forward. "You're the treasurer. Your quiet name sits under every line item she forged. When this falls apart, they'll blame you first." "I know," Derek said. His voice cracked a little. "That's why I made copies. I just didn't know when I'd be brave enough to give them to someone." "You just were," Elijah said. We walked back in silence, the wind now snapping harder than the rain. The time for defense was over. The offensive had begun. At the meeting that night, the room was packed, tighter than I'd seen since the summer festival. Folding chairs crammed shoulder to shoulder, neighbors whispering into coffee cups, eyes darting toward us when we entered. Tiffany stood at the front, blazer crisp, expression manufactured. "We're here to address some confusion," she began, "regarding development rights, project approvals, and, unfortunately, baseless accusations that threaten the harmony of our neighborhood." "May I speak?" Elijah asked from the second row, voice calm. Tiffany didn't hesitate. "You're not on the board." "But I am the original developer listed on 2/3 of the parcels here. You filed my removal without a hearing." A flicker in her expression. "That's not accurate." "Then why is my signature forged on the county documents?" The room stiffened, heads turned. "I filed those under advisement from our compliance team." "Silverpine Consulting?" I asked, "or was it your husband's other LLC?" Someone in the crowd actually gasped. Tiffany's lips parted. No words came out at first. Then, "This conversation is off topic." "But it's being recorded," Elijah said, calmly holding up his phone. "And you just confirmed you filed the removals yourself." That moment, dead silence. Even Sylvia didn't move. A neighbor stood from the back. "Is that true, Tiffany?" Her response never came. Elijah turned to the crowd. "You've been lied to. We have the documents, the forgeries, the fake companies, and a man who couldn't sleep another night letting it slide." He nodded to Derek, who hadn't said a word, but his eyes said enough. Tiffany didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. She stood frozen at the front of the room, jaw clenched, hands locked around the edges of the podium like she was bracing for a wave that never came. But it had already hit. The crowd just hadn't realized how deep it would go. After Elijah's statement, no one else said a word. Not Sylvia, not the secretary trying to shuffle papers like the meeting was still alive, not even the nosy neighbor who usually asked about bush trimming policies. Just silence, wide and raw. We walked out without being stopped. The next morning, the first sign that things were cracking came from Clara Morales. She left a paper bag of pastries on our porch. Inside was a sticky note in her careful cursive. "If you need more names for witnesses, I've got 2. Elijah smiled at that one. By noon, we had 5 different neighbors text us versions of, "I didn't know what she was doing." Suddenly, no one remembered voting on anything. Suddenly, Tiffany's empire of compliance was a little less confident. But we weren't done. "Community pressure is a start," Elijah said, spreading the documents across the table again. "But if we want to end this, we go beyond the HOA." "County fraud unit?" I asked. "No, not yet." He looked up. "We go to the state licensing board. She's filed developer revocations under a false identity. That violates professional ethics laws. If she loses her registration, she loses her authority." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "She tried to bury Dad's legacy under a forged signature," he said. "This isn't just about our name on a plot of land anymore. This is about what they think they can get away with." We made copies, clean, sharp, time-stamped, 2 binders, one for us, one to send certified, return receipt. Then came the unexpected part. Derek showed up. Not announced, not skittish, just standing there on the porch, folder in hand, like he had something he'd been waiting 20 years to hand off. "I've been the treasurer for 8 years, he said as Elijah opened the door. "I signed things I didn't read. I let things slide. I thought keeping quiet meant I was doing less harm." "You kept records," Elijah replied. "You didn't stay quiet, not really." Derek stepped inside. "They'll try to spin this, call it a misunderstanding, blame me." "Emily already have," I said. He nodded. "Then let's give them less room to lie." He opened the folder and revealed a spreadsheet. Dates, payments, approvals, the full trail of Silverpine transactions, some flagged in red, others labeled duplicate vendor, a quiet audit he'd been running in secret, even while pretending not to notice. "This," he said, "is my line. I'm not crossing it again." Elijah reached across the table. "We won't let you stand alone." Later that night, we finalized our presentation for the next board hearing. This time, we weren't showing up as residents. We were coming in as builders, planners, and sons of the land. I set up the slide deck. Zoning approvals, mismatched signatures, time-stamped payments to a shell company. We even pulled up the deed to the property line, Dad's original survey sketch, scanned and projected for all to see, the one with the bench drawn in pencil, marked, "Install memory seat under oak, EM and NM." That bench wasn't just furniture, it was evidence. Symbol, timeline, anchor. This is what they tried to erase, I said, standing in the dim light of the projector. Not just a name, not just a signature, but a story they never earned the right to rewrite. The next meeting wasn't on HOA turf. We requested a public forum space at the Civic Hall, neutral ground, open mic, mandatory minutes. Tiffany would have to speak on record. We were almost ready. The Civic Hall smelled like fresh varnish and borrowed authority. Folded chairs lined the floor in tight rows, the lighting soft but clinical. A makeshift podium stood at the front, flanked by flags and a banner that read, Community Integrity Forum. Fitting title, considering who was about to get exposed. We arrived early, Elijah in his button-down and boots, carrying the binder like it was a verdict. I had the laptop, projector cables, and the original deed tucked into a weatherproof folder. Derek followed quietly, hands fidgeting with a pen, but eyes forward. He hadn't shaved, but his spine was straighter than it had been in years. 10 minutes before the start, Tiffany swept in with Sylvia and 2 other board members. No clipboard this time, just a stiff smile and a large leather binder that probably contained the usual smoke and mirrors. She didn't look at us. The moderator opened the session with a generic greeting, thanking everyone for attending and reminding the board that the meeting was being recorded for public records. Elijah leaned over to me and whispered, "It's the only sentence they'll remember." Then the floor opened. Tiffany took the podium first, voice syrupy. There has been a wave of confusion in recent weeks, mostly due to outdated documentation and administrative turnover. As your board president, I want to reassure you that every action has been taken with the best interests of the community at heart. And how do shell companies and forged removals serve that interest? Elijah asked loudly, not bothering to wait his turn. A few heads turned. A woman near the back pulled out her phone and hit record. Tiffany glanced toward the moderator. "He's not recognized." "I am," said Derek, standing slowly from the third row. "And I'd like to cede my time to Elijah McCain." The moderator blinked. "That's permissible." Elijah walked up with no notes, just the binder and that heavy, measured calm he'd perfected over years of dealing with chaos. "My name is Elijah McCain. I'm the original developer of this land. Some of you know that, some of you were made to forget it." He opened the binder and began with the zoning documents, real ones, stamped and signed years before Tiffany ever joined the board. Then came the duplicate invoices to Silverpine, the copied signature overlays, the payment dates, the notes from the clerk's office. By the time he got to the part about forged removal from the developer registry, the room had shifted. People weren't just watching, they were leaning in. He ended with a projection of the deed. Our father's signature, the survey sketch with the bench under the oak, labeled in faint pencil. "Install memory seat here, for boys." And then he said something I'll never forget. "You can build a lie, you can polish it, frame it in a binder and speak it into a microphone, but it will never have roots. Not like this land does, not like the truth does." Tiffany tried to recover. She stood, flustered. "These documents are incomplete. There are nuances, legal nuances, our team is currently reviewing." "Then explain," I said, projecting a side-by-side image of the forged signature and the original. "Is this a nuance or a felony?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. A board member to Tiffany's right leaned away slightly, whispering something to Sylvia. She didn't respond. A man near the front stood up. "Why are we just now hearing about this?" Another voice followed. "Is this why you've raised the fees 3 times in 2 years?" Tiffany's voice cracked for the first time. "These allegations are mischaracterizations, misunderstandings." "But not denials," Elijah cut in. Derek stepped forward. "I'm the treasurer. I saw the numbers. I let it happen, but I won't be silent anymore." And just like that, the room flipped. Not all at once, but visibly. You could see it in the faces of neighbors who'd once ignored us, the ones who walked their dogs past our fence without making eye contact. Now they were watching Tiffany, not like she was a leader, but like she was a question with an answer that didn't add up. Tiffany looked around the room, and for the first time, she looked small. The meeting didn't end with fireworks. There was no shouting, no slammed gavels, no security escorting anyone out. It ended the way most powerful things do, quietly. Tiffany stepped back from the podium. Sylvia stopped typing. A few board members slipped out early, pretending to check phones or answer fake calls. But the damage was done. We stayed behind afterward, packing up the projector and stacking the binders. Several neighbors approached us, not just to offer support, but to share details we hadn't even asked for. "She charged us for gutter cleaning 3 times last year," one man said, shaking his head. "We don't even have gutters." "I served on the board before Tiffany," another woman whispered. "We never voted on those security patrols she billed. That was all her." One by one, the pieces began falling into place. The story wasn't just ours anymore. Back at the house, Elijah laid the deed on the table again. The pencil note, "Install memory seat here. 4 boys," was still faint but visible. I stared at it for a long time, realizing just how much Dad had planned for us. Not just in concrete or ink, but in intention. He hadn't built a property. He'd built a place for us to return to. "They're rattled," I said, "but she won't fold just because the neighbors are turning. She's banking on fear." "She's also betting we don't follow through," Elijah replied. "She still thinks this ends in rumor, not court." He was right, so we drafted the formal complaint, with Derek's statement attached, with payment logs, invoice overlays, zoning inconsistencies, all of it bound, indexed, and printed in triplicate. "I'll file in person," Elijah said. "No email, no upload. I want a stamped copy in my hand." We drove to the county building the next morning. Elijah walked in alone while I waited in the truck, watching people bustle in and out, all going about their day with no idea how one sheet of paper could alter everything. When he came back, he didn't say anything right away, just held up the stamped envelope. The county seal glared back like a silent ally. "It's official now," he said, getting in. "How'd it feel?" I asked. He looked out the window. "Like drawing the first blueprint again, clean page, straight lines." That night, Clara invited us over. She made coffee the way our mom used to. Strong, black, poured into mismatched mugs. She didn't say much at first, just listened as we laid out what we'd filed. Finally, she set her mug down. "You boys did right. She tried to bury what your father stood for, and if you hadn't fought back, she would have gotten away with it." Elijah nodded. "We're not done." "No," she said. "But you're past the part most people never get through, the silence." She stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down an old wooden photo frame. Inside was a picture of our dad and Clara standing in front of the property lines, years before the first permit was ever filed. They were holding a shovel and laughing. "Your father used to say, legacy's not what you build, it's what refuses to be torn down." Elijah took the photo in both hands, eyes lingering on Dad's crooked smile. Back home, he placed the photo beside the binders. Then he stepped outside, boots crunching the gravel path, and sat down on the bench beneath the oak tree. The night was still, windless, the sky cloudless for once. No thunder, no drama, just air. I joined him. "You think she'll show up to court?" I asked. "Oh, she'll show," Elijah said. "She won't want to, but she'll show. She still thinks she can talk her way out. She thinks her silence is stronger than ours." He tapped the bench rail once, slow and deliberate. "But she's wrong." The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No high ceilings, no thundering echoes, just fluorescent lights, beige walls, and rows of chairs that felt more like a DMV than a battlefield. But we knew better. This was where the lies would lose their footing. Elijah sat 2 seats ahead of me, binder resting on his lap, thumb tracing the edge of the deed. He wasn't nervous. Focused, yes, but not shaken. That was Tiffany's role today. She entered just before the hearing started, heels clicking with more hesitation than usual. Gone was the crisp blazer. Today she wore a muted gray suit and makeup that couldn't quite mask the tension sitting behind her eyes. Sylvia trailed behind her, silent, hands empty. Derek arrived separately, looking like a man who finally knew which side of the line he was standing on. When the clerk called the session to order, Judge Calloway entered, mid-60s, silver hair, expression carved from granite. He wasted no time. "We are here today regarding complaint number C-4817 McCain v. Norwood and the West Haven Ridge Homeowners Board." Tiffany stood to deliver her opening. "Your Honor, I understand the frustration this family feels, but this is a simple, administrative matter, misfiled documents, clerical miscommunication." Is it your signature on the developer removal form? Judge Calloway asked, cutting straight through her script. Tiffany blinked. Yes, but under board advisement. Were you aware the name you signed over was still the legal title holder of the property? Silence. Ms. Norwood? She hesitated. I was under the impression his claim had lapsed. That's not what the county register indicates, the judge said flatly. Mr. McCain, your response? Elijah stood, calm and measured. He walked to the projector, pulled up the overlays of the forged documents, and walked through each, line by line. Every inconsistency, every payment, every manipulated timestamp. He didn't raise his voice once. The goal wasn't miscommunication, he said. It was erasure. They didn't just file a removal. They wrote me out of the story, out of the land I built, out of the home my father died protecting. Then he projected the deed, the same pencil-sketched bench under the oak, the initials still visible. This wasn't a piece of land to us, it was our return, and they tried to turn it into leverage. The judge nodded, taking notes. And the HOA funds paid to Silverpine Consulting? Derek stood. His voice shook slightly at first, but steadied with each word. They were falsified, labeled as landscaping but never approved. I've attached my sworn affidavit and transaction log. You're admitting complicity, the judge asked. I'm admitting silence, Derek said, but I'm not silent anymore. There was a stillness in the room then, not dread, just wait. Tiffany tried once more to interject. This entire hearing is based on misinterpreted paperwork and hearsay, but she never got to finish. Judge Calloway raised a hand. I've seen enough. He looked down at the folder in front of him, then back up. The court finds the removal of Elijah McCain from the development registry to be unlawful. All rights are to be immediately restored. Further, the forged signatures, fraudulent payments, and misrepresentation of board authority are being referred for criminal investigation. Tiffany's lips parted, but no words came. Sylvia dropped her pen. In addition, the judge continued, Mr. McCain is entitled to pursue damages in civil court if he so chooses. It was done. No applause, no cameras, just truth, heavy and final. As the courtroom emptied, a few neighbors lingered by the hallway, nodding. One shook Elijah's hand, another whispered, "Took guts." Outside, the sun was already setting, but the sky was clear. For once, the wind didn't carry tension, it carried closure. I looked over and saw Elijah staring at his phone. He had pulled up the photo of Dad with Clara, shovel in hand, laughing in the field before it all began. She would have kept going, he said, if no one stopped her. I nodded, but she ran into the one person she couldn't silence. You mean us? He shook his head. I mean the truth. The courthouse doors shut behind us with a soft click. No news vans, no cheering crowd, just the sound of gravel beneath our boots as we walked toward the truck, the same way we always had. Quiet, steady, side by side. Elijah tossed the stamped court documents on the dash like he was done carrying their weight. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders lowered, not slumped, relieved. Think she'll resign? I asked. She'll vanish, he replied. Resignation would require admitting something. Tiffany Norwood didn't show her face again after the ruling. By the end of the week, neighbors reported seeing a moving truck in front of her house. No goodbyes, no notice, just boxes, silence, and a car that didn't belong to her parked in the driveway overnight. Word spread fast. The HOA held a vote within 3 days to dissolve the board for restructuring. Sylvia didn't contest it. No one did. But what came next wasn't revenge, it was restoration. We walked the full boundary of our land the next morning, that same trail Dad had mapped out behind the old barn. The air felt different, lighter somehow, like the ground had exhaled. At the creek, we found something we hadn't noticed before, an old wooden marker driven deep into the mud, faded handwriting on the side, McCain Survey Line 1993. Elijah crouched down and ran his thumb across the letters. I forgot this was here. Dad didn't, I said. He left reminders everywhere. Later that afternoon, we returned to the oak. The bench was still solid, sunlight warming the cedar slats, initials still visible like time had no say in it. We didn't speak for a while. Then Elijah leaned forward, hands clasped, voice low. You know, I thought if we just pushed back hard enough, we'd win. But that's not what made this worth it. What did? He glanced over at me. Every time we told the truth, it grew stronger. That's what beat her, not the evidence, not the court, just the truth, rooted deeper than she ever stood. I let that sit. Across the gravel path, Clara Morales stepped out with a basket of late tomatoes. She waved. No clipboard, no notes, just a neighbor. A real one. The neighborhood changed after that. No dramatic flips, just little things. People pausing to say hello instead of hurrying past. Kids playing closer to our side of the street. The kind of peace you notice most when it returns after being gone too long. A few weeks later, Elijah and I installed a small plaque beside the bench. Nothing big, just stainless steel, set in stone. It read, "Built to last, remembered always." It didn't need to say more. We knew what it meant. And the land did too. Sometimes the fight isn't about reclaiming a space. Sometimes it's about refusing to let someone else rewrite what was never theirs to begin with. Our Father built this place to be permanent, and we honored that, not by yelling louder, but by standing taller. Have you ever had to stand your ground against an HOA or someone who tried to erase what mattered? Tell us your story below, or just drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We read every one. Your voice matters.